Dr. Mike Joy, the leading environmental scientist in your country, he said just the other day, he said, we are delusional about how clean and green we are.
Well, that might be Mike Joy's view, but I don't share that view.
But he is very well qualified, isn't he? And he's looked, for example, at the number of species threatened with extinction in New Zealand. He's looked at the fact that half your lakes, 90% of your lowland rivers are now classed as polluted.
Oh, I had no idea. I'd never heard of Hatsacker or the BBC or any of that until people put me onto it, and then I had a look at it, and I was just amazed at what. And I was even more amazed at John Key's response. I was just blown away, and I wasn't the only one who was blown away by that response.
Good old apple. Oh, no, it's not even more fresh. Right, well, even if you're afraid of that,
I mean, that's a story we could tell, is it? That, coming back to John Key, did I tell you the story about Mum? She was in the, there's like a Grey Nationals group or something like that, and in the Lower Hutt Old Nationals, and so he was doing the rounds. He gave the talk, and then he was on his way out doing the handshaking thing with all the oldies, and he got to Mum, and Mum said to him, "Oh, hi, I think you know my son." And he said, "Oh, who's that?" And she said, "Oh, Mike Joy." And he went, "Oh, yeah, I know him. Yeah, I don't agree with what he says, but, that's great," kind of thing. And she said to him, "Yeah, but he's got a PhD in freshwater ecology and he's been working on it for 20 years now." And apparently his face just dropped, and out he just stormed, he grumped and left. I would love to have been a fly on the wall and seen his reaction of, having that pointed out. We have a crisis. We have a freshwater crisis. We have a biodiversity crisis. We have the highest rates, the highest proportion of threatened species, not just in our native fish, but right across all of our plants and animals. We undoubtedly have a crisis here. When you look at the data, no matter how you twist it, it's always agriculture that is the major impact on our waterways, and almost regardless of what you look at, that is it. That and forestry, so, those two things. I've always said if nitrate turned rivers red, we would not have a problem. It's only because you can't see it. So most of the councils had some sites, going right back to the 90s. Until the point now where there's about 900 sites around New Zealand that are managed by regional councils that are fed into the LAWA database. The core of the issue is, though, that they're reporting to the public on their own performance, and so you tend to want to collect data that's going to make it look like you're doing a good job. The scientists are doing their job, it's that political interference that happens at another level, There is naturally occurring nitrate when you have disturbance. So, the classic is gorse, A lot of nitrate produced by those, nitrogen-fixing plants in that first seral stage of recovery after a disturbance, so after a big slip or after, forest has been cleared. There will be some nitrogen loss from those. That's natural nitrogen, as opposed to, what's been fixed by urea fertiliser and then into the system. It's just one of those cumulative things. As you go down the catchment, more and more of these tributaries with intensive farming, it just goes higher and higher and higher as you go down the river. So when you go up to the mountains and start at the top, then it's not an issue. It's just as you go down. So it's a photospectrophotometer. It's a really high-tech nitrate measuring kit. It's as good as or better than what the lab quality is for the samples that are sent to the labs by the regional councils. It's got to scan and find the sensor. There we go. That's low. Ruby Island Creek is what we've just done the monitoring in and it's 0.36 milligrams, so it's a tiny bit higher than where we were before. This is kind of low-level agriculture, the kind of stuff that we used to have here, sheep farming, low intensity. So this is kind of right at the as good as it can get end of water quality in New Zealand. So this is the Selwyn at Coes Ford. This place is it's got a special memories for me because as a kid, I don't know, like in primary school, this is where we came for our school picnics. This has been in the news a lot, this place, because last time I was here, there was zero water here, completely dried up. This is just a pool, stagnant pool at the bottom of it. Right, let's see what the nitrate levels are at Coes Ford. Yeah, 6.64.
It's really high.
This is taking in the whole catchment. There's a massive amount of dairy farming above this point. We're almost at where it flows out, so this is where we're capturing everything, some groundwater and the surface water that comes off the land. What it means is that it's going to grow a lot of algae when there's light and warm temperatures like now. You'll get algal blooms happening at that level. There's way more nitrate than the algae needs to grow. The only thing that will limit it now is if there's not enough phosphate in the water. Mm-hmm. So this is when all the harm starts to occur, when it starts to get up around these levels, environmental harm.
With the new coalition government, because of the pressure and their mandate that they had to do something about fresh water, we came up with a set of limits or parameters for where we should set freshwater health for New Zealand. And the nitrate limit has, the bottom line in our recommendations is 1 milligram, is the very 1 milligram per litre, whereas the existing one is 6.9 milligrams per litre, so a substantial reduction in what is the acceptable level of nitrate in rivers, which is what I'd been saying all along, and now we've got this 16-member panel agreeing on that. What it meant for me was a vindication of stuff that I'd been saying, and I'd been kind of pointing out that the National Policy Statement, existing one, the nitrate limits were 10 or 20 times higher than what the ecosystem health limits were. And the industry and others were trying to isolate me and make out that I was the crazy one, out here where the rest of the scientists didn't agree with me.
There are 5 topics which we're interested to cover today. There are obviously the proposals relating to the improvement of the quality of our fresh water, and there's been very, very keen interest in that throughout the week.
I'm a farmer. If we're sort of told to fence off the rest of the waterways that aren't planted in trees, the problem's going to be gorse. Now, gorse is a legume. It fixes nitrogen, and that gorse will leach the nitrogen into the waterways. And I think you really, really need to take this into account because it's very important. It's been shown up and around Lake Rotorua, the leaching of gorse, the nitrates into the lake.
I feel a little compelled to step up as the professor who also looks after the Rotorua Lakes to correct the comments that were made earlier about gorse in the Rotorua Lakes area. And it actually is not much of a problem there. It is in the rules, but gorse was actually over-mapped, and it turns out to occupy relatively small areas. So we're actually having trouble making the reductions we expected to make by eliminating gorse. So that's an important correction, I think.
As a farmer, I think pretty universally we are doing a lot of work, and we fully support initiatives, discussion. One of the things is that we want less regulation, if anything. But I do appreciate that we do need to improve.
It's gone out to consultation, so there's, I think, last I heard there was 16,000 submissions had come in, so there's a massive job for the Ministry for the Environment just to sort that lot out. Somehow out of that process, the Minister has to decide on what those numbers are going to be. We'll then know how successful that process was. We've only been measuring since the 90s, but we also didn't start to intensify farming until late 80s, early 90s. So The beginning of the monitoring also coincided with the major changes in intensity.
I really want to put some pressure on this idea that there's some sort of trade-off between the environment and economics, and the environment should come second. One cow has roughly the effluent footprint of about 14 people, so that's like 28 million people. That's like putting Tokyo up. You use an enormous amount of electricity to shift an enormous amount of water to grow some grass, to produce some milk. Now, a figure which absolutely shocked me is I had a colleague who was trading electricity, and he called me up in February of last year, and it was right in the middle of the summer. And he goes, "Peter, do you know where the biggest user of electricity is, apart from Auckland and TY Point?" And I go, "No." And he goes, "Ashburton." It's using at that time, it was using up to 2% of New Zealand's total electricity supply. Now, this is not during the rugby season, so it's not like a whole lot of cockies are sitting around big screen TVs watching the Crusaders play. I mean, this was basically pumping water flat out in the middle of summer to grow grass, to put cows in a place where the cows shouldn't have been. The solution to this is, once you understand you've got too many cows, and you've got too many cows, go back to what I said about the intensive and extensive growth, you've got too many cows in sensible areas and too many cows in stupid areas. So the solution to the cows in the sensible areas is just have fewer of them.
We can be simple ticket.
Welcome to City Gallery Wellington, Te Whare Toi, and welcome to tonight's BWB talk.
When I wrote the introduction to Mountains to Sea, and I tried to use this analogy of a jetliner, an aeroplane, and the engineers work out what load the plane can carry, right? And they tell us what that load is, and then the loaders say, right, this is as much as we're going to put on this plane. And I don't think there's anyone in this room would dream of arguing with that flight manual or with those experts, especially not if we or our family were flying on that plane. But when it comes to the environmental rivers or freshwater, when the scientists say this is as much as it can handle, then we seem to think that we can go and put this into some kind of consultation process. And this has been the history of freshwater management from a scientific point of view.
If the economics drive you to something really big, and you're going to have an industrial scale supply of water, the other side of the equation is an industrial scale size of demand. And in New Zealand, the only industry that can take that much water is the dairy industry, because they use a tremendous amount of water. I mean, to actually go, war story, we took Jim Anderton when we became minister. I was in MAF at the time. We took him down to Canterbury. He was from Canterbury. So we took him down, he saw one of these great big centre pivots. You know, they look like, I don't know, Triffids marching across the countryside. And the guy that was next to me goes, "Minister, do you know how much water this thing uses?" And he goes, "No." And he goes, "Well, about the same as the city of Christchurch."
The Crown, the government, whatever, has completely failed freshwater in New Zealand, you know? It's blatantly obvious. Why don't we admit that we've completely failed and start again?
I don't want to make a direct connection because we can't, but we have the highest levels of colorectal cancer in the OECD, and the highest levels in New Zealand are in South Canterbury and Southland, and that happens to be where we have really high levels of nitrate in drinking water from intensification of farming.
I remember coming here in 2013-14. I was given the Charles Fleming Award for environmental work by the Royal Society, and you get the prize, and part of the deal is you have to travel around the country giving lectures. And I remember when I came to Wanaka that Gilbert Van Reenen, a famous local photographer, was introducing me, and he said that he's a vet, and he first came to Wanaka as the town vet 30 years previous, and then there were 2 cows in town, and their names were Bessie and Daisy or something like that. And now there are 33,000 cows in the district, and he doesn't know any of their names. So, I mean, it's just a shocking indication of how much change has happened in such a little time. I've been invited here for the one summit, and it's been going all week, and it's the sort of the final couple of days. I think I'm brought in for things like this for some shock tactics on reality checks. Dr. Doom. Undoubtedly, our intensive agriculture is our biggest environmental issue impact that we have on the land here. We have the highest proportion of threatened native freshwater fish of any country that I can find in the world. That's the best indicator I can think of what we've done to our freshwater. 82% of our waterways in pasture catchments are unswimmable. That's the pathogen issue there. Most of the lakes, like around 80% of the lakes that are in pasture catchments as well, are polluted. They've flipped into another trophic state. And half of our greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. That is the big issue that we have, and this is, we have to face up to that reality. Nitrate in drinking water in Denmark, a study of millions and millions of people, a rich country that's got a good database of records, a lot of groundwater being drunk there, contaminated with nitrate from intensive farming. Out of those millions of people, you can find the relationships between nitrate levels in drinking water and the risk of getting colorectal cancer. And so looking at that, we can then look at the increase in risk, because all of the drinking water in Canterbury comes from groundwater. I've put this graphic together over time. As you see the big hit of dairy farms, then suddenly, boom, you see the nitrate levels in the groundwater go up. Once those underground water aquifers start to fill up with nitrate, it starts to show up and you can see it. Ashburton's been in the news, around warnings around drinking water and mothers being told that they have to buy bottled water because they can't trust the water out of the tap anymore. So it's kind of, a place that's been pivotal in the realisation for New Zealanders about what's happening. Let's run these drinking water ones. We stopped in Hinds and we stopped in Ashburton to get some water from out of the water supply that everybody's drinking in town. Do you want to run this one through and then let's see where the drinking water's at. Here we go. Yeah, see, okay, so that's 6.42 is the significant increase in the risk of getting colorectal cancer is at 0.87 milligrams, and the 15% increase is at 2.1 milligrams, so that's 3 times. And the studies look like about for every milligram, every 4 milligrams, there's another 10% increase in risk. So that's halfway to the maximum allowable value. This would be triggered through the Ministry of Health. I mean, that's the thing that makes me so angry. Rich people can go buy bottled water, This is what we feed to our people, and the bottling companies get the good stuff. I discovered this report back in 1984, back before Ministry for the Environment and DOC and everything. It was DSIR that had done the research, and there was plans then for a big irrigation scheme. And they warned back then that a couple of decades of intensification would mean nitrate coming through the groundwaters that supplies the drinking water there at levels that would breach that World Health Organization limit of 11.3 milligrams, which is what the medical officer of health was warning people, the mothers, about. But it's a whole lot worse than that, because 11.3 milligrams, the drinking water standard at the moment, is about 10 times higher than the level that nitrate in drinking water is associated with colorectal cancer. But back in 1984 with that report, what they were warning about was, where you're going to get the water supply for these people. But the irrigation schemes went ahead, and that whole process happened. What we need to do to save our rivers also will have great benefits for animal welfare, for climate change, for tourism, for, there's so, if you silo it then just into fresh water, then I can't do that. I've always, had to look for the bigger picture.
independent research, which is the crucial part of finding out about, you know, how we're going to survive in the future. And climate change research is a really good example of that. Climate change, climate disruption is going to make everything, the problems we have now, much worse. So, you know, you sort of wonder how bad things have to get before we're going to respond.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.